theme song for the Gear Podcast. You like that one, Uncle Leon? I gave a little bit of extra
love the
mayo
gusto on there, mate.
Yeah, I was
So good.
there was a couple of people that missed the vocal intro last time. And here's the thing, Uncle Leon, last night I couldn't get to sleep all night. So I stayed up until like maybe 2 a.m. just watching Queensryche videos and Queensryche reaction videos and people doing Queensryche covers. And there was a lot of like that sort of energy. So I have that happening at the moment. Yeah.
A lot of this happening while you're singing.
Man, that like Jeff Tate singing Take Hold of the Flame in Japan in like 1984 or 5 or whatever is just so incredible. It's such an incredible vocal performance.
God tier Tates.
It's the complete top to bottom, the voice is there, the range is there, the intensity, the moves, like it's just unbelievable. Like no wonder these people, these like vocal coaches are watching it just like barring up over it. It's just amazing. So
who's the lady, the reaction singing coach lady?
There's a bunch of them. Like I think I sent you the charismatic voice one. I really like.
She's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does some.
Does
Obviously
a lot of
the
Devon
ones.
as well, yeah, which is pretty cool. And interviews some of those guys too, which I really like.
Yeah. And it's really interesting hearing the full... I always thought, what do vocal coaches actually do? What do they know? And then you hear them talk about anatomy and all the various techniques, and you're like, wow, this is a proper thing. I mean, this is coming from a guy who didn't know that singers sang notes until he was 18. I thought it was all just like you just scream as hard as you can. Like, what's a melody? That's what you do on guitar in a solo.
I mean, some of them do that, so you're not that far off. What do you think? What do you think Jeff Martin does from Racer X?
Oh, he just definitely screams, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he just wakes up in the morning and gives it.
That song, Superheroes, it's so high. It's the highest thing I've ever heard. I still, when I think about that song,
crazy.
It's unbelievable. Anyway, but no, it's been a little while since we've spoken there, Uncle Leon. People like that last episode. That's nice. People like that Tonex one. So I'm happy to see that.
And there's more Tonex to come, isn't there? By the time this one comes out, they probably have had a double banger. And hopefully some people have tried your captures, Troy.
Oh, yeah. Go and check it out.
You've been going down the capture route and the IR route as well. You want to tell me about that? Well, you're just getting straight in. We don't need to talk about the West Coast Eagles or the Dockers. Just put that away for this week.
I'll give you one other life update, Uncle Leon. You want a big one? This is fresh off the presses. My daughter...
You're expecting another... Sorry.
No, I'm not expecting another. You know my daughter, Remy. Let me tell you something, buddy. She's been toilet training for approximately 2 hours. Already 1 poo in the potty, already 1 wee in the potty. 2 for 2.
Just
double banger.
Just figured it out.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. So with that out of the way, and hopefully she listens to this maybe when she turns 18 or something like that, I'll play it for her. But with that being said, let's talk about some IR stuff, mate, because I've been just loving it. Doing some
You've gone down the rabbit hole, have you?
Yeah,
mate.
Well, you did this about 6 years ago, and I just never caught up. So the thing about my studio is that to do simple things sometimes, like, for example, send a piece of audio out and then through a speaker, is slightly more complicated than it probably is in other situations. And it's just, it's not that it's impossible. It's just that I have some weird shit with clocking and Dante's and audio interfaces and whatnot. So anyway, it took a little bit of time, but I got there. And yeah, I've made some impulse responses, and I put those, you put those captures up of the Tonex things. And I thought, well, that's cool, but I got to complement that with the appropriate, cabinet on the other end. Otherwise, you're only getting about half the job. So I went through it. The Tonex captures are reasonably easy. Impulse responses are reasonably easy to make, as you know. And do you know
now
how
using
I know
Room EQ Wizard?
I am. And see, here's the thing.
Great program.
Yeah, great program. And when I need to learn how to do something, I just jump on YouTube and have a look and see who's already made a video on how to do it. And I, in fact, referenced your video a couple of times. So it's been a really interesting exercise to go through. So I can go really nerdy with it if you'd like, if you want to hear about it.
Let's go. What did you try and what didn't work? Let's just get in it, mate.
Okay, firstly, I tried a few things. I think the thing that I got hung up on last week a little bit was the power amp. So I have a few
Yes.
power
So-
amps at my disposal.
A non-negligible factor. What have you got and what did you enjoy?
Well, okay, so, and I'll just, before I talk about that, the rest of the signal chain to make these impulse responses it's all like reasonably high quality equipment. You know, I've got very good Avid audio interface for digital analog conversion, good microphones. I've got these great Avitus mic preamps.
You've got some
I've got the
stuff,
stuff. There's no weak links here. So I'm looking through the signal chain, and I got to get out of the computer. I got to get into a speaker. I have to capture it, right? So most of that is okay, but I have to obviously amplify the signal coming from the computer. And it's not like there's not information about this, but I was really curious as to what effect the power amp had on the impulse responses, and I happen to have 3 here. So rather than just like trawl through a bunch of forum posts, I just did the experiment myself. So I got hung up on a few different aspects of the capture process, but the power amp was a big one. So I've got a Orange Pedal Baby, which I liked the idea of that because I'll quickly say there might be some bullshit in this, but I just had to think about how to process it, right? That's a little Class AB power amp, so I wasn't certain about how that would affect the tone. If anything, maybe it doesn't have any make any difference, but I was interested. I've got your Matrix, what's it called? The Matrix GT800.
GT800 FX, yeah.
Is that what you use to make your LT TV cabinet?
I did, yes.
Yeah, the one that everyone should have, and that I still use because it's a really great sounding impulse response, which is pretty flat. It's Class D. And then the other one that I have immediately available is a Fryette 292 power amp, which is a valve power amp. Guitar, another sort of guitar-y power amp. So anyway, it's easy enough. Like I've got the setup. I just ran the impulses through, recorded them, and then I could, look at them and then obviously load them into a plugin and hear what they sound like. So, as you mentioned before, I'm using Room EQ Wizard to make these impulse responses because I'm on Mac. And everybody apparently that's making these impulses uses PC and uses that Voxengo deconvolver.
Not available for Mac.
Not available for Mac. I tried to look at options of getting it using not wrappers, but like other ways of opening PC software on Mac, and I just got too bored of that. And yeah, man, it's funny because I went through a few things. I've got the what's it called, the Stimulus. The one that you had
Stimulus
years ago. And
so let's pull up a pin for a second. Let's pin this, because when you are making an impulse response, what we're talking about are cabinet impulse responses. So you mic up a cab, and because essentially it's a linear filter, you're able to use an exponential sine sweep, which just kind of sounds like a bloopy alien noise to most people. There's some pretty well-established theory. And I found the paper. I've actually read this paper. It's by Angelo Farina from 2000.
Can you pop that up on the screen so everyone, or a link
I can
to
probably pop that up on the screen if you'd like me to do that, Troy.
Do it.
Let's do this. It's
We'll
actually
read it
called
together in silence.
Well, look, I'm just going to put it here. It's called Simultaneous Measurement for Impulse Response and Distortion with a Swept Sine Technique. So that's kind of that's where this is all coming from. So you get the whoop kind of noise. That's the best way to describe it. You record that, and then what you've got to do is you've got to use a process called convolution or deconvolution in order to turn that into a lovable impulse response file that you may know as like your cab IR. So that's what you're doing. You're running bleeps and bloops through your mic'd up cab with different power amps.
So you play a sound out of the computer through the speaker. You record that sound with a microphone, and then that's exactly what you said. And then it turns into the lovely impulse response that we're talking about. So years ago, when you were going through this exercise, you had this wave file, which was this, you said a bloopy alien noise. It's just a sine wave sweep from like 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz or thereabouts. So like that sort of thing. It's probably a few seconds long. And that is the sound that gives you effectively what the response is of the speaker, right?
Yeah, and it allows you to measure the frequency response.
Correct, yeah. So what I was doing as a process is I had that in a Pro Tools session. I recorded that through the speaker. I mic'd it up. I had it coming back into Pro Tools as a recorded sine wave sweep. and then I had to work out how to turn that into an impulse response. And that was on the Mac side of things where things got a little tricky. I just couldn't work out what software or how to do it in a way that made sense. And I knew Room EQ Wizard, which is a great piece of software that I use for actually measuring my studio for if I'm never doing any acoustic treatment or speaker placement and stuff. I'm familiar with it, sort of, not in the context that I'm using it for now, but for in other situations. So anyway, I was struggling to actually make the impulse be a usable sound. And I was flying back and forth between a couple of different programs to make this happen. And as it turns out, I could just use Room EQ Wizard in and of itself to make the impulse response. And that was significantly quicker and easier. As mentioned, I had a stimulus that, like the sine wave sweep that you gave me years ago.
Yep.
And I didn't need to use that anymore because Room EQ Wizard has one built into it. So I basically open up Room EQ Wizard. I go hit the measure button. It plays a sine wave sweep through my system, out of my computer, in through the power amp, in through the speaker. I record it through the microphone, and then it just gives me the curve, which is awesome because you can see like the actual frequency response curve immediately on the screen. And that was really useful because running the different power amps, which was otherwise the exact same microphone positions and
right,
and
you
stuff,
could immediately just
I could layer
see any differences.
I could layer 3 different frequency responses over the top of each other and see what they sound like, or see what they look like, I should say. And they were a little bit different. I actually noticed maybe I'll cut to the end and say the Matrix, I think, is the way to go. The other two had interesting tones, but the Matrix tended to feel the most flat and balanced across the board. The Orange and the Fryette had a little bit more clarity in it, maybe, like as finished impulses to play through, but also tended to sound like maybe a little bright. Both of those power amps as well have EQ controls on them, so sort of EQ controls. The Orange has like a bass and treble control, so theoretically, like 12 o'clock is when that is flat.
Interesting.
But I also
tolerances?
Tolerances, but I also noticed, and I read another post that someone put up, that it's kind of like a 10 and 2 thing, or like 10-30, 130 thing as you set the bass and treble, that actually gets it more balanced. So being that you have to either calibrate that, or it isn't like just a set and forget like flat sort of thing, it sort of put me off a little bit. And then the Fryette has a presence and depth on it. And again, I read one forum post that mentioned that the Fryette, when the presence is at like 9 o'clock or something, is when it's at its most flat. But I just found both those amps, like, to listen back to them, they felt like maybe a little too bright. The Fryette at first on some, like when I used it in context, and I sent them to you as well, it felt really cool, like really, really cool. And then I used it on some other captures and it felt really like harsh and kind of hurty. So
so there's that trade-off between sounding good and being accurate. And I guess, if you're using, say, an older modeler, for example, and it can still load IRs, and you want to like add that coloration of, say, a VHC power amp to it, or Fryette power amp, then that can be really, really cool. But then if you've got like a really accurate Tone X capture or like an Axe-FX model, and then you've got this kind of colored IR, then maybe the coolness factor goes away because it starts doing weird stuff that you wouldn't expect if you're used to the amp or something.
Yeah.
So
I want to come
it's
back.
an interesting.
I want to come back to
trade-off
that idea as well in a minute, because baking the power amp into a tone, I think, is something just worth having a tiny little discussion about. But I'll go back to the other, like kind of where I left off. So I did a bunch of experimenting with the power amps. I sort of found the one I liked the most. And here's also something that I did, Uncle Leon. Once I got the system working, I was pretty much using an SM57. Well, no, I used an SM57 for all these experiments to make these IRs. But I needed to find some. I needed to find some balance, right? I need to see like, okay, what is good, right? And I have a bunch of Ownhammer impulse responses that I've owned for like years. I bought them years and years ago. And it's basically, 57s and vintage 30s, which is the speaker I was using, in Marshall cabinets. It's all basically very stock stuff. But I was able to find an impulse response of like the Ownhammer stuff that I really liked. And I used that as a baseline for good tone. And then as I
Yeah,
was
interesting.
moving mics around and experimenting with different types of like creating impulse responses, I didn't try to match it directly, but I tried to make sure I was in like the ballpark of it, because at least it's, I mean, you know, there's always going to be variables with it, but there should be some measure of tolerance. And I kind of use that. So that's maybe a little cheat code not cheat code, but that's how I thought I could at least test if something was good. And I was using Tonex for my tests too, because like it's useful that it has a bunch of like pre-recorded demo sounds in it that you can change the amps through.
Which makes it easy, hey?
Yeah, so I was able to click through a bunch of my like Tonex captures that I made with different cabs. I tried your cab, which is a greenback cab, but I could sort of use that as a baseline because that's a really good sounding IR, not too bright. And there's this thing, I talk about this on this all the time, at about like 3.2K, 3.4K, where it just pisses me off so much, and I really struggle to play when I have that, like an abundance of that in the tone. And so some of my investigations, shall we say, emphasize that a little bit more, and then I was able to change like remove it slightly as the process went on. So anyway, I did the sine wave sweep, but I also did a white noise sweep as well.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
If you go on the internet and look how people make impulse responses, there are several different ways. Like I've seen people do it with like a sample's worth, like a noise, like the shortest little
single click,
to stimulate the speaker moving, and then they'll capture that, and then that will be used as the impulse response. I've seen people use white noise, so effectively the like when your TV's turned off, which is all frequencies at the same time, and that can give you the capture of what the speaker sounds like. So I thought, well, we'll try it out, you know. And specifically with the white noise, I found an app that works on Mac that actually just made impulses. You literally just click the button, right, and it plays the thing through, and it spits out an impulse response, and you're done. So that's awesome. So I tried that out. And again, same mic, same position, same power amp. I left all that the same, and I could A/B that, and that was quite a significant difference. I tried that first, actually, when I finally got stuff to work. I did the white noise thing first, and then I went to the sine sweep. And the sine sweep was like a significantly clearer, more natural sound.
You've also got the length of the IR as well. I know like 500 milliseconds, a lot of companies use for their IRs, where that's kind of like anything more and you just get a bunch of kind of information you probably don't really need in your guitar sound, like room resonances and things like that.
It was interesting because, sorry to cut you off, but like I read a bunch of fractal stuff, like, and possibly old articles, like fractal articles on their wiki page. Because if I'm not mistaken,
what do they use? 170 or something?
170, but that's their like high res. Is that right?
Yep, ultra res. Yep.
Oh, that
correct.
Is there something more than ultra res, or is ultra res the biggest one?
I think ultra res is the ultra-rest.
Ultra-rest one.
Yep.
So yeah, that's 170 milliseconds long, as you said. There's some companies that only, or some plugins that only use like 20 milliseconds. I think 20 milliseconds is like a minimum. So you can see it like when you do the sine sweep and you convert it to the impulse, it just gives you this like very tiny bloop, little like transient and then decay thing, and that lasts for a certain amount of milliseconds. Most of the information is in the first like maybe 20 to 30 milliseconds, but then there is a decay and it slowly disappears.
There's some non-negligible stuff in the tail as well. And you can even, I feel like Pete Thorne did a video on impulse response length as well, where sometimes shorter IRs end up working better. Like you have less kind of, if the room you're shooting them in, for example, has some weird low-end resonances, you won't capture that with a shorter IR.
Because I think I guess like the low end just resonates for longer. Therefore, for the IR is shorter, it doesn't have that in there. But I think a lot of software will truncate the IR if it's too long for its normal use. I try to find with Tonex what the length is that is required for them, but it was a little unclear. It sounded like it was maybe 42 milliseconds or something length for that one. But then like I look at my own Hammer ones that I bought, and they come as like 200 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds. And then there's some that talk about it being, you can get them as like over a second in terms of impulse response length.
Okay, so I just found on the internet, the Tonex pedal supports a maximum IR length of 2048 samples, so around 46 milliseconds at 44.1K.
Yeah, so something around that. So anyway, this is getting really nerdy technical stuff. So if
Really
this is not
nerdy,
for
ladies
you,
and gentlemen.
I apologize for the Gear podcast boring you, not you getting your money's worth this week. But it's an interesting sort of topic. But anyway, so the white noise thing, I didn't like it, and I suspect, like, you've got a direct line to God, right? Like you could maybe send Cliff Dog a message if you needed to.
I feel like he's probably posted about this stuff about like why the sign sweep thing. It's
No,
literally
but what I want to ask specifically is back in the olden days, like, remember the Axifex Ultra? People hated the cabs in that. I wonder if like that was a white noise, like impulse, like stimulus versus a sign sweep. Maybe not, but that would maybe explain, not specifically with them, but even like original impulse responses going back like 10, 15 years, maybe some people were using that as a stimulus and not the sign sweep. Because the sign sweep, I was able to get like super close to some of these other ones by doing that. So I was curious.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I feel like on the Axifex 2 as well, they started off, some of the factory cabs were shot with a really neutral microphone, like an Earthworks or something, and then they applied a filter to simulate different microphones.
Right.
And then I think kind of Cliff changed his mind that was never very accurate. So now on the 3, like you have Dynacabs where they're capturing lots and lots of individual IRs, and which is kind of cool. It's fun that that's come that far in such a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
But I know with the Ultra, they eventually updated the firmware so that you could add 10 user impulses.
Yeah.
I think they are a shorter length in there. But yeah, I remember bumping some third-party IRs into mine and being like, oh my God, this is much better than the stock cabs.
I think I did the same because back then, when did I get mine? 2011 or something? I think I maybe had a couple of red wires. They were the only...
Red wires, yeah.
It was them. There was maybe one other company that was around doing impulse responses that people talked about. But yeah, it was a non-negligible difference, as you say. Mm-hmm. But I'm really curious. Like, I'm not gonna it's not gonna keep me up at night. But I'm curious to know if maybe that capture style, because we spoke about this years ago. When you pull up an impulse response and go, why does this sound so bad? Like, how are people so bad at recording guitar sounds? It's really not that difficult. Like, and I'm going to talk about one other thing in a second. If you have an SM57 and you point it at approximately the same place on a 12-inch speaker, it's going to sound like okay. It can sound slightly better if you move it around a little bit. But if you get it in the ballpark, it's always going to be okay. But then you pull up these impulse responses and they sound really odd. And so again, I wonder if that's the sign sweep versus the white noise or versus the little blippy guy. I don't know.
I feel like a sort of thing on maybe... what's a company called? Not JST, the other one that does Amp Hub, STL. It was one of the producers. It's like, oh, here's how you capture an IR, and they were using the click method. Yep. The click method works pretty well for reverb and room impulses, but yeah, there's literally papers demonstrating that exponential sign sweep is more accurate. So if you're going for accuracy, which nowadays that's what we're all going for with modeling, we want it to sound like the thing that it says it sounds like. What I found interesting was, so the free IR that people can find in the link in the video description if they're watching and listening on YouTube, that I know a lot of people really like. That was like an accident. I think I was borrowing one of your Royers and I was like, I'll just take a few test shots, just do a blip with the Royer, like center about, 2 centimeters from the grill cloth, SM7B just pointed at the dust cap, and then when I bought a 421, like similar spot, and I just kind of blended them in, probably in Cab Lab, and then it was like, oh, that sounds pretty good, and then, see, here's the thing as well. There's another way to capture IRs of IRs is if you have that stimulus signal, and then let's say you've got the UA or the Brainworks, Friedman plugin, where you can disable the preamp and the power amp and just leave the cab IR loader. What you can do is pop that stimulus signal on a track, load the plugin with just the IR, and then just bounce it out and then deconvolve it, and you've captured that mini system in there. Clever. So, yeah, for example, if there's a cabinet that you love in your old Pod HD and it's not available as an IR, you can capture it that way. You can capture IRs of lots of stuff.
Yeah, that's clever. I never thought about that.
If there's a particular channel strip that doesn't really distort, that's pretty linear, and it's an EQ curve that you can capture an IR of that, or you can bake that in on the back end if that's something that you want to do. So, but again, like a lot of classic EQs like Pultex and all the fun things people like, they do get a bit distorted, and the magic happens when you overdrive them. It's not just going to be. You can also use if you're trying to figure out, say, in your recording chain, if something is, I don't know, not transparent, you can shoot IRs of stuff there, and if they come out flat, you're like, cool, that's pretty transparent. Great example, the TC Electronic 2290. Everyone talks about how flat sounding that is. And we had Santiago Alvarez on the show a while ago. I was chatting to him. He measured his 2290 totally flat. I measured mine, and it's got this like very subtle, like around 10K kind of like wide-ish boost, which is interesting. Okay. Yeah, so you put it in the chain and you're like, wow, my guitar sounds brighter and more janglier, and it has delays. So yeah, that's actually not super flat. There's this thing in there, so it makes everything sound a little bit brighter.
Yeah,
which I think is interesting. It probably shouldn't be doing that. I think it is theoretically meant to be kind of flat. But
maybe it means
you can use.
It needs a little service.
Yeah, or maybe I don't want to lose the magic. So yeah, that's another use case for these measurement techniques on there. It is nerdy.
It's super nerdy,
it's fun, because let's face it, with the proliferation of modelers and reactive loads and IR loading, the stuff isn't hard, but sometimes you're like, yeah, why does this sound bad?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's not, in theory, some of this stuff's not actually that hard. Anyway, I feel like going through this process has been an incredibly useful learning experience that I was kind of expecting to learn how to do the process, but in the process of doing it, I learned a few other things. I'll talk about one other aspect of this, and then I just want to ask you about power amps, and we can move on to something else, and then everybody can like jump back on board and be interested again.
Everyone can take a breath.
So what I did as well, got the power amps working, got the stimulus working. I actually found that there was this little like high frequency resonance that I was a little unhappy with, and I was trying to. I've had this a lot. It's like not an uncommon thing, and again, it's the bane of my existence. So I had this SM57 on the cab, and I was like, maybe it's the 57. What happens if I change the 57? As it turns out, I have a couple of 57s, but I knew one of them has been in the boot of my car, or the trunk of my car for Americans, for maybe like the last 6 months. So I'm just going to grab that guy and see what that sounds like by comparison. And as it turns out, a little smoother in the top end. And I know that. I know all this because I can shoot the impulse response and I can look at the frequency response. And
exactly.
It's exact same position. So that was really interesting. So I found a 57.
Like people have favorite mics and things like that.
Exactly. So I'm going to label that as being my favorite 57, or at least for the time being my favorite 57.
Yeah, for now.
And then I found one more thing out, because as I got a little more into this and into the process of doing it, I grabbed your dyno mount, which has been here for 6 years, and I just remembered. So I decided to chuck that up, and I shot a bunch of impulses just to the 57 across the face of the speaker, just to see what that would be like. And one thing I didn't really think to try, because I set it up, aligned it as it should be, and I had mic'd, as you look at the speaker, I was miking the right side. So, this is the common thing. Here is the lid of a jar, but here is the dust cap of the speaker. Usually the accepted logic is you put your microphone at like the edge of the dust cap and where the paper are, and that sounds kind of good. So I was micing on this side of the thing, and I thought, there we go. You know what I haven't done? What if I mic the same position on the other side? And as it turns out, it actually sounded better. And I was like, well, makes absolutely no sense. But it did, and I could test it repeatedly. Yeah, repeatably. Yeah, that makes sense. Using the Dynamount, I could drive it back and forth and measure it, and then do the impulse responses, and that was really fascinating. And actually, shout out to John Brown, because the other John Brown, obviously, not the other one, but the other John Brown. Because I was messaging him on, I think it was Friday night, after having all this wild success, and I said, man, I did this thing and I can't work out why. And his comment, which is, I haven't mentioned this to you, but he said, he asked if it was a Marshall cabinet. I was like, yeah, it is. And he said, well, okay, Marshall cabinets, the speakers are orientated whereby the lugs of the speakers, you know, where you plug it into, are orientated in. That's how they wire them up. And, you know, like on the speakers, they have the little glue bits that drip down. So he said, like, where the glue would normally be is actually pointed on the inside of the cabinet. So possibly that's why it sounds a little less shrill and dull. I'm like,
interesting.
Wow, that's the nerdiest thing I've ever heard in my life. But that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Isn't this fascinating, everybody? I've learned stuff. I've been doing this for like 20 years. You know, I don't want to sound like an arrogant nobody or anything, but it's just, you know, that's just for you there, Uncle Leon. But anyway, it's just, it's been really fascinating. I've been really enjoying this, and I apologize to everybody that has fallen asleep. And the last thing I want to just ask you about on this to finish up this incredibly boring topic is I was watching some Michael Nielsen videos, and I think it was of his, he had I think it's his preamps, like his guitar rack preamps. That
Yes.
That he's got modeled in Kempers and Tonexes and all that, or maybe just, I think it's the Tonex, maybe the one I was watching. But he said that he baked the sound of the power amp into the cabinet IR. So like he did the IRs through the through his his VHT, whichever power amp that is, through the cabinet. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it's like, that makes sense, because if you want the flavor of that power amp for that specific, those rack sounds, then you're going to get that on the impulse response. But then it just got me thinking, like, and not to say that this is the wrong way of doing it. I'm just curious to think about it. So is it better to do that, to have an IR with a built-in power amp sound, or have the preamp itself built in with the power amp sound? So you have like the system of the speaker versus the system of the preamp power amp. Like which one, what makes more sense, and how, not makes more sense, but where would it be more useful?
So yeah, because essentially the elements of a guitar speaker that are non-linear are pretty negligible, you know, unless you're really, really pushing it to the edge of blowing the speaker up. You know, if you've got a 60 or 70 watt vintage 30 and 4 of them, you're probably not pushing that system very hard. So it's calculating an impulse response, treating it as a linear system is probably going to be totally fine. So I obviously, you know, power amps are going to be pretty linear up to a point, and then you start getting some interesting distortion behavior. For a lot of modern guitar sounds, power amp distortion is probably a negligible factor a lot of the time. For, you know, and that depends what you mean by modern guitar sound as well, right? But modeling the power amp separately, because the assumption would be that, it's not a linear, time invariant linear system. You know, there's going to be, especially once you start adding in, you know, positive and negative feedback and things like that in there, like presence and depth controls, then that's not going to be captured by an IR. What can be cool is like, the something like a VHT power amp, you know, there's going to be an impedance interaction with the speaker cabinet. So maybe kind of that's what he's wanting to bake in. And again, because a lot of, like, not all modelers will let you select different impedance curves in there. Maybe that is something that's desirable, or again, because any distortion is not going to be captured by the IR in there. Any like actual nonlinear behavior, it's just impossible
but
by
that
definition.
Would be captured by like some sort of Tonex or neural thing or whatever.
Yes.
Thing.
Yep. Exactly. So if you were, again, profiling or capturing the system, then all that nonlinear behavior should be accounted for in there. It's kind of, I guess, you know, we're talking about convolution here for impulse responses. The interesting thing about machine learning approaches to systems that have distortion is it's basically now letting you capture nonlinear systems and get accurate response for them. So you kind of, the technique that is most optimal to capture time invariant linear system, you know, exponential sine sweep, that does it, but it's obviously not going to work for a distorted amplifier or something. So that's why a lot of companies now are using machine learning, or something like a Kempo uses like a wave shaper with some input and output filters and automatically selects an underlying amp model and all those kind of things. And now they have liquid profiling, which aims to get the response like per pot on the amp, which is kind of cool. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I would probably guess, and again, it's in that, well, it sounds better doing it through this power amp, so do it. And again, the end result, we've talked about this for like 35 minutes now. The end result is like, do you like the guitar sound, and is it good versus is it accurate?
Yeah. Man,
and well, if it's accurate, it should be good. You just have to know how to make it good.
Yeah. As I said, man, like I think it clearly makes a difference. Like I've tested it, and you've heard the tests blind because I didn't tell you what each one was. And
no, they definitely sounded different.
Yeah, you could definitely hear that there was a difference. So I just thought I didn't think it would make that big of a difference. I just thought in terms of where that should be applied in the system of if you're trying to recreate a sound, I thought that was just interesting. Like I hadn't really considered that before. One thing that I thought was interesting about that was I was using, I've got a Tonex capture of the Direct module, right? The new Directify module.
Synergy thing, yep.
Which was captured through the Fryette power amp. And then if I use that through an impulse response made with the Fryette power amp, it felt like it emphasized this like kind of nasty top end. Not nasty top end, but it felt like it was like a little bit brighter and a little bit sort of, like a little bit harsh in the top. Whereas if I used it on a Soldano one that I made, it felt way more natural and it was way more comfortable to play. I'm not sure if it was like a double banger of the same power amp was causing too much issues.
Maybe.
So it's an interesting thing to talk about. Like I reckon 5-6 years ago when you were going through this, I thought all this would be a fascinating podcast to talk about. It's just funny that it's taken 6 years to get there,
So the other thing you can do is you can also calibrate. You can say if you're using a particular power amp, right? Mm-hmm. You can also capture its response.
Yeah.
With the same sweep. So you take a DI tap off it or something like that, and then you can factor that into your end result. So something like the IR utility in the Axe-Fx lets you do that, where there's two methods. One is just like a plain, I'm actually going to see what they call it because I can bring up the IR utility over here. So there's two different methods. One is called mic plus DI. One is called mic only.
Yeah.
And you can then have a reference in there as well. Like you can capture a reference and then use a reference. So you could capture the sound of your power amp. Mm-hmm. And then, so if you use the mic plus DI method, it is going to factor in the response of the power amp and essentially take that out of the IR. So you should have a really flat, accurate impulse response in there. Yeah. That's kind of the logic in there, where it's going to take out any extra coloration from the power amp. And
I was trying to work out how to do that in Room EQ Wizard, and there might be a way. If there is, I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But,
so an interesting thing you can do as well is with, let's just say you had a deluxe reverb is the only amp you have available, and you want to capture an IR of it. This method where you can run the DI to the amp. Run the test signal to the amp, take a DI from it, and compensate for that. Mm-hmm. Will leave you with a really flat IR, which is kind of nice if you're doing that on the Axe. The thing is that's not a wave file, so you can only use it in sort of like a fractal device. But I'm sure I'm sure that's not a super sophisticated proprietary technique. There's got to be people doing that.
Yeah,
where you can use that approach,
because I think you can calibrate in Room EQ Wizard. You can calibrate your microphone or something, but then I couldn't work out how to do a calibration of a microphone, which kind of makes sense. It's like, I say microphone, like it would be the power, it would be the equivalent, but like, how do you make a test? Like, how do you know what your thing sounds like in and of itself? If you record a signal through a speaker with your mic, well, what are you supposed to compare that to know if it's flat or not, and what is coming out of the playback device? So it's like, is that something that maybe, I think you can calibrate it according to other calibrations that have been made of similar mics, but I don't know how to do it myself, but I'll look into it. If someone far out, we're just talking shit now, man.
Someone's probably listening to this just going, you're all wrong. Let me tell you how it is. Let us know in the comments.
Oh, it's going to happen. I look forward to it. I only read the comments occasionally, so they filter through you.
I think it's worth also pinning that right there, and just kind of underlying why, using impulse responses of cabinets, it's been a pretty big development, man. think of 2005. If you wanted a direct guitar sound, yeah, you just were compromising.
Had
yeah,
Amplitude
you might
back in
have some.
2005, man. It was awful.
Yeah,
Like, awful.
and you can get pretty decent results now. It's not going to feel great to play with some of these older modelers just by slamming IR, like a good cabinet IR on there. It's why so many people were like, hey, I've got a Pod Pro and then a Boogie 290 power amp and a Mesa oversized cabinet. And believe it or not, it sounds pretty good. It's like, yeah, because your cabinet and your power amp are great.
Yeah.
The preamp is doing some stuff. Even going back to, it's interesting, isn't it? Like going back, like using a preamp like an ADA with a solid state power amp versus a tube power amp, and a flat power amp isn't necessarily going to give you what you want. So do you EQ the preamp differently? I always think of the SUR or the CAE 3 Plus preamp, where you had your 3 separate channels, then you sort of had a master section which was like an active EQ, because a lot of people were running those into like those H&H power amps, like non-tube power amps, right? So you're not going to have the same kind of impedance loading on the cab and things like that. So you're trying to get some of that response back, but you're doing it in the preamp, like the back end of the preamp section, or people using EQs and things like that. So
yeah,
that's pretty interesting, hey?
Yeah.
Pretty
It's
interesting.
fascinating. I mean, yeah, like maybe this will keep me up at night thinking about this stuff now. And hopefully this is, it's us talking shit, but hopefully if you're into this stuff, then, maybe you go away, think about it as well, and come to some conclusions, and then tell us how it sounds.
Yeah.
But more importantly, Uncle Leon, do you want to talk about your 335 before we wrap it up for this afternoon?
Well, I feel like we should do an entire episode about these, but I do want to give Tim Williams Guitars a shout out, because I got this back today and it's phenomenal. I mean, this guitar's always sounded pretty cool. We've used it a lot, on a lot of tracking, and if anyone wants to hear it, just listen to like any Ragdoll song. It's probably on there with a fuzz pedal and doing the grindy thing. But it's been basically a fretless wonder forever. So it's a 1979 ES335 TD, and it has that's not the pickup selector. This is the pickup selector, and that's a coil tap. So you can get some pretty interesting single coil style sounds out of it. And yeah, basically it's had a stainless refret. Tim's done his thing. I mean, he's done a bunch of my guitars, a bunch of your guitars, and it's amazing work. And it's kind of breathed new life back into it. New nut as well, which isn't like 40 odd years old and all crusty and looking like it's nicotine stained. It's this guitar's always had a thing. It's had a bit of mojo, but now you can actually play it and still have that mojo.
Yep. Little story about that guitar. We used that on the first Ragdoll EP that I did with you guys in like 2012. We used it in 2013 as well. And you didn't
tell the people the story, Troy.
You said, "Oh, you know what? I haven't changed the strings since that last recording, and I'm just going to leave the same strings on this guitar forever." I was like, "Well, that's cool, whatever." So
and also dumb,
but I believe it might have been on the second EP, or it might have been on the album, which was a couple of years later. And again, never going to change the strings on this guitar ever again. Like, cool, no worries. And then a very common technique for recording sometimes, if you've got a part where open strings are ringing out, then you can just like human capo it, like you just hold the strings at the nut and it'll stop them resonating so the guitar player can play the part. Like I would do that. Or something you can do is use the scrunchies or the hair lackeys, whatever. That will do it.
Or your fret wraps, whatever it is.
Fret wraps, or you can use some sticky tape. And I think Marty Friedman did that.
That's right.
So I remember Marty Friedman used, sticky tape, like what you would wrap a present for your grandma on her birthday. We didn't have any in the studio, so Leon used gaffer tape and put gaffer tape on, I believe, the 2 strings that he didn't want to ring out. And
big brain move, probably the B and the E.
So those strings that were on there for probably about 3 or 4 years at the time didn't last that little bit of the residue that remained on them for the rest of time, unfortunately. And I believe the strings got changed, so quite funny.
But here we are with a fresh set and fresh frets. Yep. So yeah, I've given it a bit of a cleanup because it's got that, and I'm sure people who own Gibsons from like the Norland era or older, you go to like polish it and it gets cloudy. The finish. I don't know if I'm using
seen that
the
before.
wrong.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the side and the back don't do it, but the top does. I don't know what's happened there chemically. So yeah, trying to clean that up and sort of get it, slightly less grungy. But it's a big loud thing.
Like your 335, and there's like 2 or 3 that I've played, all 70s ones that all look the same, and that's what inspired me to get 335 a year or 2 ago.
So we should do the next episode on 335s because yours is awesome, and Tim's also sorted yours out as well. So
I love mine, man. I've been playing it heaps.
They're awesome. They're awesome. We'll save this for the 335 episode.
Yeah.
People can let us know their 335 experience, and maybe we'll read out some comments on the next one. That might be kind of cool.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah.
And also let us know about your experience either using third-party IRs with your gear, capturing IRs, going down this rabbit hole of coloration, accuracy, trying to get all your stuff kind of calibrated. It's something I remember getting into. I remember reading something about IRs before I had an Axe-Fx and just thinking, what is wrong with these nerds?
Yep.
And then, I got one, and of course you got to wrap your head around it and
live and die by the sword, mate.
Yeah, exactly. As a measurement technique, I find it really, really interesting.
Yeah.
It's amazing that it can be done.
Yeah. No, totally, man. Like all this stuff, you can go down so many rabbit holes with it. It's ridiculous. It's fun. So enjoy it, love it, learn it.
Exactly. And that's what we're here for. That's what the Gear Podcast is all about, bro. Troy, any famous last words for this week?
No, none whatsoever. Have a good week,
None
everybody.
for me either.
I guess, by the time I see you next, you will have toured with Wingy Malmsteen. Is that his name?
Yeah, we'll let you know how that one goes.
Yep. So, mate, have fun. Peace out. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey. Yeah.
Good on you, buddy.
Yeah.
Oh, before I leave,
See you, mate.
do you lick a dick a day?